Nice. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Sir, I need to see your identification and proof of legal status.
I'm sorry, what? I'm just heading to my gate. Why am I being stopped?
Routine check. I need your papers. Passport, green card, something.
This is a domestic flight. I'm an American, a Harvard professor.
That's what everyone says. Do you have proof of citizenship on you?
I have...
Terminal E at Logan International Airport was humming when it happened. Sunday morning, 10:34 a.m. The kind of February day that made Boston feel frozen solid. Yet inside the terminal, artificial warmth and the steady hum of travelers created a bubble of normalcy. Dr. Jackson Taylor had just cleared customs after his red-eye from Berlin. Exhausted, but exhilarated. Still in his travel suit, charcoal gray blazer, slightly wrinkled from 18 hours of flying, his leather briefcase gripped firmly in his right hand, rolling luggage trailing behind him. The keynote at the International Genetics Symposium had gone brilliantly. His presentation on CRISPR applications for sickle cell disease had earned a standing ovation. He was thinking about his connecting flight to a conference in San Francisco, about grabbing coffee before boarding, about reviewing his notes one more time. Just another domestic connection after an international trip. Except 3 ICE agents were moving toward him through the concourse from positions near the gate area he hadn't noticed when he walked past. Their body cameras were already rolling, recording what would become the most expensive airport encounter in Massachusetts history. If you hate seeing people judged before being heard, and institutional racism and people being profiled, stop, like and share this video. Hit that subscription button right now so you don't miss the next interesting story. Drop a comment where in the world you are watching from. Dr. Jackson Taylor moved through Terminal E with the deliberate pace of 18 hours of travel weighing on his shoulders. His charcoal blazer showed transatlantic creases. His rolling luggage clicked against polished floors, and his leather briefcase hung from his right shoulder like an old friend. He'd just cleared customs, passport stamped, welcomed back with the perfunctory efficiency he'd experienced dozens of times before. Berlin already felt distant. The standing ovation from 800 geneticists, the breakthrough data on CRISPR applications for sickle cell disease, the midnight conversations in hotel lobbies, all fading into pleasant exhaustion. Now he just needed coffee and his connecting flight to San Francisco. He reached for his phone to text Sarah. She'd be at yoga, but would check messages during break. Home safe. Berlin was incredible. Heading to SFO gate now. That's when he felt it, that subtle shift when someone's watching you intently. 3 men in dark tactical gear moved toward him with purpose. Not TSA blue, not security yellow, federal agent black. The lead agent, stocky, crew cut, late 30s, locked eyes directly on Taylor. Behind him, 2 more flanked out in deliberate formation. They were forming a triangle around him. Taylor's mind registered the geometry even as his gut clenched. This wasn't random. This was tactical positioning designed to cut off escape routes, to hem someone in, to make a statement about power. Around him, Terminal E shifted. A woman with a pink suitcase slowed, eyes darting between Taylor and the agents. A businessman stopped mid-stride, phone half raised. An elderly couple veered wide, creating a nervous buffer. Taylor stopped walking. His training kicked in. 18 years navigating academic politics, Senate testimonies, hostile peer reviews. Stay calm, stay professional. The lead agent reached him first, hand resting near his weapon. Badge reading Turner. Behind him, Doxy with wire-rimmed glasses, and Waya, younger, looking uncomfortable. ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Sir, I need to see your identification and proof of legal status. The words hit like a physical blow. More phones emerged, more travelers slowed. A teenage girl whispered urgently to her mother. I'm sorry, what? I'm just heading to my gate. Why am I being stopped? Turner's expression remained flat. Routine check. I need your papers. Passport, green card, something. Routine. Taylor had traveled internationally for 2 decades, passed through customs in 43 countries, presented his passport from Tokyo to London to Sao Paulo, and never once had he been pulled aside in an American airport for a routine check. "This is a domestic flight. I'm an American, a Harvard professor." Nothing flickered in Turner's face. Just that same flat skepticism he'd seen before. In department stores, at conferences, in countless moments where credentials meant nothing because skin color spoke first. "That's what everyone says. Do you have proof of citizenship on you?" Taylor's heart pounded. The crowd had grown. A woman in red held her phone high, recording. A TSA agent watched from 20 feet away. He set down his luggage carefully, moving slowly, hands visible, the way his father had taught him 30 years ago. "I have my driver's license and my faculty ID. That's all I'm legally required to carry." Turner examined both with theatrical skepticism, yet tilting the Harvard ID toward light as if checking for forgeries. These could be fraudulent. Taylor felt shock transform into cold, clarifying anger. He was 42, 2 PhDs, 73 publications, Senate testimony, FDA-approved protocols saving lives right now, and none of it mattered. "Sir, we're going to need to verify everything downtown. You'll need to come with us." Behind him, voices erupted. "Oh my God. This is racial profiling. Someone record this." Dr. Jackson Taylor stood in Terminal E and felt federal authority closing around him like a cage. His heart sank not with surprise, but with terrible recognition of a truth he'd always known, but hoped his accomplishments might shield him from. He had been profiled. Taylor's hands moved with deliberate calm as he reached into his briefcase. Now it's the kind of measured movement designed to signal cooperation rather than threat. Around him, the crowd pressed closer, phones raised like a forest of digital witnesses. He could feel their collective held breath, the weight of their attention, the silent question hanging in the air. How far would this go? "My U.S. passport," he said, producing the navy blue document first, its gold emblem catching the terminal's fluorescent light. He held it open to the photo page, his own face staring back at him from beneath the words, "United States of America." Born in Chicago. 42 years old, American citizen since birth. Turner took it without comment, flipping through pages marked with stamps from Berlin, Tokyo, London, Geneva. Evidence of a life spent moving freely through the world, representing American science on international stages. If the agent saw any of this, he gave no indication. "Harvard faculty ID," Taylor continued, pulling the crimson-bordered card from his wallet. "Professor Jackson Taylor, Ph.D., Department of Molecular and Cellular Biology. The university seal, the holographic security features, the photo taken just last year in front of the Science Center." Turner examined it like a museum curator inspecting a suspected forgery, tilting it toward the light, running his thumb across the surface, comparing the photo to Taylor's face with exaggerated scrutiny. "And this." Taylor produced his final credential, the one he'd carried since testifying before Congress 3 years ago. Congressional Testimony Badge, Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. Official seal, his name embossed in government lettering, Dr. Jackson Taylor, an expert witness on bioethics and gene therapy. He watched Turner's face for recognition, for acknowledgement, for the moment when federal authority would meet accomplished reality and reason would prevail. There had to be a point where credentials mattered, where documentation spoke louder than assumptions, where a Harvard professor with 3 forms of government-issued identification could simply be allowed to catch his connecting flight. "These could be fraudulent," Turner stated, his voice carrying no more emotion than if he'd commented on the weather. The words landed like a slap. Around them, Taylor heard the collective gasp of witnesses, the muttered curses, the whispered disbelief. A woman's voice rose above the others. "Are you serious right now?" Taylor felt something crack inside him. As to that careful composure he'd maintained fracturing under the weight of deliberate obtuseness. But he forced it down, channeled it into the rational precision he used in lectures, in papers, in congressional testimony, when facts needed to speak louder than emotion. "Agent Turner," he began, keeping his voice level despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "I've just returned from Berlin, where I delivered the keynote address at the International Genetics Symposium. I was representing the United States, presenting American research on CRISPR applications for sickle cell disease. There were 800 scientists from 47 countries. The U.S. ambassador to Germany attended my presentation." He gestured to his passport, still in Turner's hands. "You can see the entry and exit stamps. I cleared customs 20 minutes ago. Thus, my passport was scanned, verified, welcomed home by U.S. Customs and Border Protection. I'm catching a domestic flight to San Francisco for another conference. Everything you need to verify my identity and citizenship is in your hands right now." Turner's expression remained flat, unmoved by logic or credentials or the growing crowd of witnesses documenting his every word. "We'll need to verify everything downtown," he said, as if Taylor hadn't spoken at all, as if 3 forms of government identification meant nothing, as if 18 years of academic achievement and federal recognition could be dismissed with 7 words. Taylor felt the cage locks shut. Agent Doxey moved before Taylor could process what was happening. The metallic clink was unmistakable, as that particular sound that exists nowhere else in human experience. The opening of handcuffs. "Sir." "Put your hands behind your back," Doxey said, stepping forward with practiced efficiency. Time seemed to fracture. Taylor's mind split into 2 simultaneous realities. In one, he was still a Harvard professor, credentials verified, rights protected, about to board a flight to San Francisco. In the other, he was a black man in an airport terminal watching federal agents prepare to handcuff him in front of hundreds of strangers. The second reality won. "Wait. You can't be serious," Taylor started. But Doxey was already reaching for his arm. His briefcase slipped from his shoulder. The impact against the polished floor echoed through Terminal E like a gunshot. The leather split at one corner, and Taylor watched in horror as papers scattered. His Berlin presentation notes, 18 months of CRISPR research data, intellectual property worth millions in pharmaceutical applications, equations, and genetic sequences that represented years of work. An elderly white woman standing 10 feet away gasped audibly, her hand flying to her mouth. Near Gate 23, a young black college student in a Howard University sweatshirt started crying, tears streaming down her face as she filmed with shaking hands. "Hands behind your back, now." Doxey's voice carried the weight of non-negotiable authority. Taylor complied, feeling the metal close around his wrists with a click that seemed to reverberate through his entire body. Cold steel against warm skin. The universal symbol of criminality, of guilt, of someone who had done something wrong. Except he hadn't. He'd done everything right. Everything America had promised would be enough. Around him, Terminal E had transformed into a theater of witnesses. Dozens of phones captured every angle. Turner standing rigid with Taylor's credentials still in hand, Waya shifting uncomfortably, Doxey checking the handcuffs' tightness. Travelers pressed forward, creating a semicircle of shocked observers. Voices rose in competing waves of outrage and confusion. "This is insane. Someone call a lawyer. Are they really arresting him?" He showed them his passport. Taylor forced himself to breathe, to think, to remember everything his civil rights attorney friends had told him over countless hypothetical conversations that suddenly weren't hypothetical at all. Document everything. Stay calm. Make your position clear. He turned his head toward the nearest phone camera, a woman in a business suit who held her device steady despite tears running down her face. "This is a violation of my Fourth Amendment rights," Taylor stated, his voice carrying the same clarity he used when testifying before Congress. Each word deliberate, each syllable documented by a dozen digital witnesses. "I am a United States citizen being unlawfully detained. I have presented valid identification. I have committed no crime. I have not been charged with any offense." Turner stepped closer, his face inches from Taylor's. "You'll have plenty of time to explain yourself downtown. I'm Dr. Jackson Taylor, tenured professor at Harvard University. Someone contact the Harvard administration. Someone contact the ACLU." Taylor kept his eyes on the cameras, speaking to the future. As to the courtroom, he already knew this would become. "My wife's name is Sarah Taylor. Our address is 47 Brattle Street, Cambridge, Massachusetts. I was born in Chicago, Illinois, on March 14th, 1983. The young student was sobbing openly now. The elderly woman had pulled out her own phone, hands trembling. A TSA agent stood frozen, clearly uncertain whether to intervene. A gate agent was speaking urgently into her radio. And Dr. Jackson Taylor, his hands bound behind his back, his research scattered across a terminal floor, stood surrounded by federal agents and understood with brutal clarity that every degree, every publication, every credential meant nothing in this moment. He was handcuffed in an American airport for the crime of existing while black. The cameras captured it all. The unmarked SUV smelled like stale coffee and vinyl. Taylor sat in the back seat, hands still cuffed behind him, the plastic divider separating him from Turner in the driver's seat. Doxy rode shotgun. Wyatt sat beside Taylor, staring out the window with that same uncomfortable expression he'd worn since Terminal E. They thought he couldn't hear them. Or maybe they just didn't care. Taylor sat in silence, processing the surreal transition from international scientist to detained suspect in the span of 30 minutes. His mind kept replaying the moment, the handcuffs clicking shut, his briefcase hitting the floor, papers scattering like his dignity across polished tile. The faces of strangers, some horrified, some filming, some crying. The weight of humiliation settling into his bones like lead. He'd done everything right. Everything America promised would be enough. Harvard degree, federal recognition, congressional testimony, U.S. passport held high, and still handcuffs. "Turner's strategy is working," Doxy said from the front seat, his voice carrying that casual tone people use when discussing sports scores or weather patterns. Taylor's attention sharpened. He kept his face neutral, eyes on the window, but every nerve fired to attention. "Yeah?" Turner's response was barely audible over the road noise. "We hit the international terminals during peak arrivals from Africa and South America. Easy numbers." Doxy shuffled papers, maybe checking a tablet. "Way more efficient than workplace raids. People are jet-lagged, confused, not thinking clearly. Most don't even know their rights." Taylor's breath caught. He forced himself to breathe normally, to show no reaction, yet to become invisible in the back seat while his world tilted on its axis. "District Chief wants 15 this week," Wyatt added, his voice quieter, reluctant. "We're at 11. 15. The word echoed in Taylor's mind like a death knell. Not 15 dangerous criminals, not 15 security threats, just 15. 15 bodies, 15 numbers on a spreadsheet, 15 human beings processed through a system that measured success in quotas rather than justice. "Professor makes 12, Turner said, glancing in the rearview mirror. "Even if his papers check out, We got the stop on camera. Looks good for the monthly report? Even if his papers check out. The words confirmed what Taylor had known the moment Turner's eyes locked on him in Terminal E. This had never been about documentation, never about security, never about legitimate law enforcement. This was about numbers, metrics, performance reviews, a federal agency that had transformed constitutional rights into productivity targets, that had weaponized immigration enforcement against anyone who looked like they might be foreign, that had turned American airports into hunting grounds where skin color determined who got stopped and who walked free. Taylor's shock crystallized into something colder, sharper, more dangerous than anger. This wasn't just about him. This was systemic, deliberate, a strategy outlined in morning briefings and rewarded in performance evaluations. Peak arrivals from Africa and South America, easy numbers. He committed every word to memory, every inflection. So every casual admission of what amounted to institutionalized racial profiling dressed up as law enforcement metrics. Doxy laughed, a short bark of sound. Remember that lady from Ghana last month? She had a master's degree from MIT, work visa, everything legit. Still took us 4 hours to process. Chief loved that one. Good press, Turner agreed. Shows were thorough. Taylor closed his eyes, not in despair but in focus. His mind, trained by decades of scientific research to observe, document, and analyze, was recording everything. The timestamps, the route they were taking, the exact wording of their conversation, the admission that they detained people even when papers check out just to inflate statistics. Beside him, Wyatt shifted uncomfortably, as if sensing Taylor's attention even with eyes closed. So this wasn't just his story anymore. This was evidence. This was the confession that would unravel everything. Taylor opened his eyes and stared at his reflection in the window. A Harvard professor in handcuffs, listening to federal agents discuss quota systems like salesmen celebrating a good month. He would remember every word, and he would make sure America heard them too. The interrogation room was 8 feet by 10 feet, painted institutional beige, lit by fluorescent tubes that hummed with electrical persistence. A metal table, 2 chairs, a camera in the corner with a blinking red light. No clock, no windows, no sense of time passing except the growing ache in Taylor's shoulders and the progression of his anger from hot to cold to something approaching absolute zero. 20 minutes. Maybe that's how long it took for Agent Turner to verify Taylor's passport through federal databases. Taylor knew because he'd watched Turner's face when the confirmation came back on his tablet. That brief flicker of irritation when reality refused to conform to assumptions. U.S. citizen. Born Chicago, Illinois. Passport valid. No flags, no warrants, no concerns. And still, Taylor sat handcuffed to a metal table. "Dr. Taylor," Turner said, entering the room for what might have been the 3rd or 4th time. Taylor had lost count. "Walk me through your Berlin trip again." "I've already explained this." Taylor kept his voice level despite exhaustion clawing at him. "International Genetics Symposium. Keynote address on CRISPR applications. I was invited by the European Molecular Biology Organization, the U.S. Ambassador attended my presentation." "And you're sure these credentials are legitimate?" Turner tapped Taylor's Harvard ID, which sat on the table between them, like evidence at a crime scene. "I've been a professor at Harvard for 18 years. "Anyone can print a fake ID." Turner leaned back, arms crossed. "We see it all the time. People using stolen identities, claiming professional positions they don't hold. Then call Harvard." Taylor's patience was fraying like old rope under tension. "Call the Department of Molecular and Cellular Biology. Ask for Dean Martinez. Ask for my research assistant. Call my office number. It's on the Harvard directory. Turner made no move toward his phone. We'll verify everything in due time. Due time. The phrase was a weapon, wielded with bureaucratic precision to justify infinite delay. The door closed. Taylor was alone again. He didn't know that at Harvard, his absence had triggered alarm bells. His research assistant had called his office when he missed their scheduled 2 p.m. meeting. His department chair had checked flight records and confirmed his plane had landed hours ago. By 3 p.m., Harvard's administration was making calls to Logan Airport security, to Massachusetts State Police, to anyone who might know where their missing professor had gone. He didn't know that Sarah had received a frantic call from a stranger who'd witnessed his detention, who'd gotten her number from someone who'd overheard Taylor stating his address for the cameras, that she'd immediately contacted Marcus Chen, a civil rights attorney who'd lectured at Harvard Law and kept a list of lawyers for exactly these situations. He didn't know that his detention was already viral. 17 different videos from Terminal E, combined views approaching 2 million, hashtags trending, legal experts commenting on cable news about Fourth Amendment violations and racial profiling. All Taylor knew was the humming fluorescent lights, the cold metal table, and Turner's face appearing periodically with the same skeptical questions. These credentials could be fraudulent. Walk me through Berlin again. You're sure you're a U.S. citizen? Hour 3 became hour 4. Taylor's water bottle sat empty. His request for a phone call had been noted and ignored. His briefcase with 18 months of research remained somewhere in Logan Airport, papers scattered, intellectual property exposed. Hour 5. Turner returned with a printout. Taylor's Harvard faculty page, plus his publications list, his professional biography. Proof that everything Taylor had said was verifiable truth. Turner examined it as if it were a foreign language he couldn't quite translate. We're still confirming details. Hour 6. Taylor's head rested on the cold metal table. His shoulders screamed from hours of restricted movement. His mind had moved past anger into a space of crystalline clarity where every indignity became evidence, every delay became documentation, every illegal minute became ammunition for the lawsuit he was already building in his head. The door opened. Turner stood there with Taylor's belongings in a clear plastic bag. "You're free to go," he said, without apology, without explanation, as without acknowledgement that 6 hours of a citizen's life had been stolen by federal authority and casual racism dressed as procedure. Taylor stood on legs that had gone numb. It was 2:47 a.m. He'd missed his San Francisco flight. He'd missed his conference presentation. He'd missed 6 hours of his life he would never get back. But he'd gained something too. Evidence, witnesses, a case that would make history. They released him at 2:47 a.m. through a side exit of the federal building, as if smuggling out evidence of their own misconduct. No fanfare, no formal apology. Just Agent Waya, who'd barely spoken during the entire ordeal, handing Taylor a clear plastic bag containing his belongings with the kind of uncomfortable silence that spoke volumes about guilt he couldn't acknowledge. Taylor's hands shook as he checked the contents. Wallet, a phone, dead battery, keys, his Harvard ID now bearing the fingerprint smudges of federal skepticism, his passport, verified 6 hours ago and somehow still insufficient. His briefcase. The leather was scuffed, the zipper partially open. Taylor's stomach dropped as he looked inside. His research notes were there, but shuffled, out of order, pages bent at corners where careless hands had rifled through 18 months of genetic sequencing data. His laptop was there, but the privacy screen showed fingerprints. Someone had tried to open it. The Berlin presentation folder was there. But the papers inside were no longer in the careful organization he'd maintained. They'd searched his intellectual property like contraband, examined his life's work like evidence of a crime that didn't exist. "Sorry about the mess," Wyatt muttered, not meeting Taylor's eyes. It was the closest thing to an apology Taylor would receive. He walked out into the February cold at 3 a.m., a Harvard professor who'd been treated like a criminal, carrying a briefcase that had been violated by federal authority, wondering how he'd explain to Sarah why he was 6 hours late, why he'd missed his connecting flight, why everything had gone so catastrophically wrong. His phone, plugged into a gas station outlet while waiting for a Uber, came alive with 247 missed calls and messages. Sarah. Harvard administrators, news outlets, lawyers, strangers who'd witnessed his detention and wanted him to know he wasn't alone. 14 days later, the offer arrived. Department of Homeland Security letterhead, legal team signatures, official seals that looked impressive on paper and meant nothing in practice. "That's goodwill gesture," was the phrase they used, as if goodwill could be purchased, as if constitutional violations came with a price tag that could make everything disappear. $150,000 in exchange for silence. A confidentiality agreement that would seal the records, gag Taylor from discussing his detention, protect the agents from accountability, and let the quota system continue targeting the next professor, the next engineer, the next American citizen whose skin color made them suspect. Taylor sat in his Harvard office, the same office where he'd mentored dozens of graduate students, where breakthrough research had happened, where he'd believed merit and credentials actually mattered, and read the offer 3 times. His civil rights attorney, Marcus Chen, sat across from him, waiting. "They think this is a negotiation," Marcus said quietly. "They think we'll counter with a higher number and settle quietly. That's what usually happens." Taylor looked up from the letter. Through his office window, he could see students crossing Harvard Yard, moving freely through space without being stopped, without being questioned, without being handcuffed for the crime of existing. "What do they usually offer in cases like this?" Taylor asked. "First offer? Usually around $50,000 to $100,000. They're starting higher because you're high profile. Harvard professor, viral videos, media attention. They want this gone before it becomes a PR disaster." "Too late," Taylor said, his voice carrying that same clarity he'd used when stating his rights for the cameras in Terminal E. "It's already a disaster. They just don't want America to see the full scope of it." Marcus leaned forward. "Jackson, well, I need to be clear about what trial means. Years of litigation, depositions, cross-examination, your life under a microscope. They'll dig into everything, your past, your work, your family. They'll try to paint you as difficult, as confrontational, as someone who provoked the situation. It'll be exhausting and invasive and brutal. And if I take the money? The quota system continues. The targeting continues. Next month, it's someone else. Maybe someone without your credentials, without your platform, without Harvard backing them up. Someone who gets deported despite being a citizen. Someone whose life gets destroyed instead of just disrupted. Taylor set down the letter. His decision had been made the moment he heard Doxy's voice in that SUV, discussing easy numbers and peak arrivals from Africa and South America like he was talking about fishing spots instead of human rights violations. "I'm going to trial," Taylor said, his words carrying the weight of a man who'd chosen principle over convenience. "The American people need to see what their government is doing." Marcus smiled. The kind of smile lawyers get when they know they're about to make history. "Then let's show them." Diane Morrison arrived at Taylor's Cambridge home on a rainy Thursday in March with 3 banker's boxes and a reputation for destroying government immunity claims. She'd made her name prosecuting civil rights violations for the DOJ before switching sides, deciding she'd rather hold the government accountable than defend it. Her record spoke for itself. 12 wins against federal agencies, settlements totaling $67 million, and a particular hatred for cases involving racial profiling. They made a mistake refusing to settle, she said, spreading documents across Taylor's dining room table. Not because you would have taken the money, Marcus told me you wouldn't, but because now they have to give us discovery, and discovery is where cover-ups go to die. Her team was surgical in its precision. Former federal prosecutors who knew exactly which documents to request, which depositions to prioritize, which threads to pull until the entire system unraveled. They filed motions with the efficiency of people who'd spent careers on the other side and knew every loophole, every delay tactic, every way the government would try to protect itself. The first breakthrough came 6 weeks into discovery. Internal emails, hundreds of them. A digital paper trail that bureaucrats had assumed would stay buried in departmental servers forever. Communications between ICE district chiefs and field agents. Policy memos that never made official records, performance metrics that reduced constitutional rights to spreadsheet cells. Diane called Taylor at 11 p.m. when she found the smoking gun. Enhanced enforcement zones, she read, her voice tight with barely controlled fury. That's what they call it officially. The memo is from District Chief Patterson to all Terminal E agents, dated January 15th, 2025, 1 month before your detention. Taylor put her on speaker so Sarah could hear. They sat together on their couch, holding hands like anchoring each other against the storm. Focus enforcement resources on international arrivals from the following regions: Sub-Saharan Africa, South America, Caribbean nations, and Southeast Asia. These zones have demonstrated higher yield ratios and support our quarterly performance targets. Diane paused. Jackson, they're literally telling agents which races to target for quota purposes. The evidence kept mounting like floodwaters rising. Body camera footage from Terminal E, not just the public videos that had gone viral, but the full recordings, including audio from before the approach. Turner's voice caught on Doxy's camera. That one looks good. Professional, probably has documentation, but we need numbers. Casual, calculating, hunting, more footage from the SUV ride. The quota conversation Taylor had memorized, now corroborated by digital recording with timestamps. Easy numbers. District Chief wants 15. Every word documented, every admission preserved. My performance reviews. Turner's annual evaluation praised his initiative in identifying high traffic enforcement opportunities and exceeding apprehension quotas by 27%. His supervisor's comments noted, Agent Turner has developed effective strategies for terminal enforcement that balance thoroughness with efficiency. His focus on international arrivals has significantly improved unit metrics. Diane's team found 12 other cases, 12 other travelers detained by Turner's unit in similar circumstances. A Nigerian engineer with an H-1B visa, held for 8 hours. A Brazilian doctor visiting for a medical conference, questioned for 3 hours despite valid documentation. A Jamaican-American professor, another professor, detained at baggage claim and missed her grandmother's funeral. Every case followed the same pattern. Professional credentials dismissed. Documentation called fraudulent. Hours of detention after verification. No charges, no apologies. Just bodies feeding a quota system that measured success in numbers rather than justice. The depositions were brutal. Turner, under oath, tried to maintain that each stop was based on reasonable suspicion, while being unable to articulate what specifically made Taylor suspicious beyond traveler behavior patterns. Pressed by Diane's questioning, he admitted he couldn't remember what Taylor was wearing, what Taylor's luggage looked like, or anything specific about Taylor's behavior, only that he fit the profile for enhanced screening. "What profile?" Diane asked. Turner's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. The silence spoke louder than any answer. And District Chief Patterson's deposition collapsed under the weight of his own emails. Confronted with his Enhanced Enforcement Zones memo, he claimed it was about resource allocation, not racial targeting, even as Diane systematically showed him data proving that 89% of his unit's Terminal E detentions involved travelers of color. The evidence painted a picture so damning that even federal attorneys started distancing themselves from the case. The John Joseph Moakley United States Courthouse in Boston had seen its share of historic cases, but nothing quite prepared it for Taylor versus Turner. By 7 a.m. on the first day of trial, news trucks lined the waterfront. Satellite dishes pointed skyward like flowers seeking sun. Civil rights organizations held rallies on the plaza. Law students camped overnight for courtroom seats. The case had transcended one professor's detention. It had become a referendum on federal authority, racial profiling, and whether credentials and citizenship meant anything when confronted with systemic bias. Judge Patricia Williamson, a Carter appointee with 30 years on the bench and a reputation for running a tight courtroom, surveyed the packed gallery with the kind of stern efficiency that suggested she understood the weight of what was about to unfold. Diane Morrison stood to deliver her opening statement in a navy suit that projected authority without flash. She didn't need theatrics. She had evidence. On February 16, 2025, Dr. Jackson Taylor committed a crime, she began, letting the words hang in the air. The jury, 8 women, 4 men, diverse in age and background, leaned forward. He flew home to America while being black. The government's objection was sustained, but the point landed. What followed was a systematic dismantling of federal authorities' facade of legitimacy. The body camera footage played on screens throughout the courtroom. Crystal clear, undeniable. Turner examining Taylor's passport with theatrical skepticism. These could be fraudulent. His voice echoing through speakers as jurors watched Taylor. Dr. Jackson Taylor, Harvard professor, American citizen, present 3 forms of government identification, only to be told none of them mattered. The gallery watched Taylor's briefcase hit the ground, papers scattering. Watched the handcuffs click shut. Watched an elderly white woman gasp and a young black student cry. I watched a Harvard professor state his Fourth Amendment rights while federal agents ignored them. 47 million views. The number appeared on screen, a testament to how many Americans had witnessed this violation and recognized it for what it was. Then came the SUV audio. Diane had isolated it, cleaned it up, made every word unmistakable. Turner's strategy is working. We hit the international terminals during peak arrivals from Africa and South America. Easy numbers. District Chief wants 15 this week. We're at 11. Professor makes 12. Even if his papers check out, we got the stop on camera. The courtroom went silent. Not the silence of empty space, but the heavy silence of collective held breath. Juror number 7, a black woman in her 50s, closed her eyes. Juror number 3, not a white man who'd served in the military, leaned back with an expression that suggested his entire worldview was shifting. Expert witnesses paraded through. Constitutional law professors from Yale and Georgetown explaining Fourth Amendment protections. Former ICE directors testifying that quota systems violated agency policy and constitutional principles. A statistician who demonstrated that Turner's unit detained travelers of color at 17 times the rate of white travelers, despite finding violations at identical rates. But nothing compared to Turner's cross-examination. Diane stood before him like a surgeon with a scalpel, precise and devastating. Turner, in his dress uniform with his attorney beside him, tried to maintain the rigid composure that had served him in Terminal E. It lasted approximately 15 minutes. Agent Turner, Dr. Taylor's passport was verified through federal databases within 20 minutes of his detention, correct? Yes. His Harvard credentials were verified by your office calling the university directly, correct? Yes. His congressional testimony badge was confirmed by the Senate committee office, correct? Yes. So within 20 minutes, you knew beyond any doubt that Dr. Taylor was exactly who he claimed to be. A U.S. citizen, a Harvard professor, a man with federal recognition. Yet you kept him detained for 6 hours. Can you explain why? Turner's pause stretched too long. We were being thorough. Thorough. Diane let the word hang. Were you also being thorough when you detained Dr. Adeyemi for 8 hours? When you detained Dr. Ferreira for 3 hours? When you detained Professor Williams and caused her to miss her grandmother's funeral? All verified citizens, all professional credentials, all people of color, all counted toward your quota of 15. Objection. Withdrawn. Diane moved closer. Agent Turner, in your deposition, you stated Dr. Taylor fit the profile for enhanced screening. What specifically about Dr. Taylor's appearance or behavior created reasonable suspicion? The silence returned. Turner glanced at his attorney, at the judge, anywhere but at Diane or the jury. The way he was moving through the terminal. What way was that? I can't specifically recall. You can't recall what made you stop him. But you're certain it wasn't his race? It was not racial. Then what was it? Turner had no answer. The jury saw it. The gallery saw it. America, us watching via live stream, saw it. The defense tried to recover. Government attorneys presented policy manuals, training procedures, institutional safeguards that supposedly prevented racial profiling. But every document they introduced, Diane used against them, showing how written policy diverged from actual practice, how safeguards existed on paper but dissolved in terminal enforcement. The trial lasted 8 days. By the end, even the federal attorneys looked defeated, going through motions they knew were futile. The jury deliberated for 2.5 days. When they returned, their faces told the story before the verdict was read. The jury foreman was a retired schoolteacher from Brookline, a white woman in her late 60s who'd sat in the front row taking meticulous notes throughout the trial. When Judge Williamson asked if the jury had reached a verdict, she stood with a steadiness that suggested she understood the weight of what she was about to announce. "We have, Your Honor." The courtroom held its collective breath. Taylor sat between Diane and Marcus, Sarah's hand gripping his under the table. 8 days of deliberation. The longest stretch of uncertainty since that night in Terminal E, except this time he had lawyers, evidence, and the eyes of America watching. In the matter of compensatory damages, we find in favor of the plaintiff, Dr. Jackson Taylor, in the amount of $8 million. The gallery erupted. Judge Williamson's gavel cracked like thunder, restoring order. But the energy couldn't be contained. Sarah's grip tightened. Diane's expression remained controlled. But her eyes held triumph. "In the matter of punitive damages," the foreman continued, her voice rising above the murmurs, "we find in favor of the plaintiff in the amount of $12 million. $20 million. The number echoed through the courthouse, through news alerts pinging on phones across America, through federal agencies suddenly realizing that constitutional violations carried consequences that couldn't be buried in confidentiality agreements. Turner sat frozen at the defense table, his face drained of color. His attorneys were already shuffling papers, preparing appeals that everyone knew would fail. The evidence was too damning, the jury too certain, the case too clear. Judge Williamson addressed the courtroom with the gravity the moment demanded. This verdict reflects not just compensation for harm suffered, but a statement about the boundaries of federal authority and the price of systemic constitutional violations. Let the record reflect that the jury has spoken, and their voice is unmistakable. Outside, the courthouse plaza transformed into celebration and reckoning. Civil rights activists chanted. News anchors delivered breathless analysis. Legal experts called it a watershed moment in Fourth Amendment jurisprudence. And somewhere in Minnesota, Victoria Benjamin, the attorney whose grocery store detention had inspired Taylor, sent a text that read simply, "We're changing the system, one verdict at a time." 3 months later, Taylor stood in a converted brownstone in Cambridge, 3 blocks from Harvard, addressing a room full of civil rights attorneys, law students, and activists. Here the sign outside read, "Taylor Institute for Civil Rights and Constitutional Justice." "This institute exists because what happened to me happens to thousands of Americans every year," Taylor said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd transformed personal trauma into systemic change. Most don't have Harvard credentials. Most don't have viral videos. Most don't have the resources to fight back. This changes today. The Institute's funding came from $8 million of his settlement. Money that could have been retirement security or generational wealth, now transformed into legal representation for those targeted by federal overreach. The staff included former prosecutors, civil rights attorneys, investigators who specialized in uncovering quota systems, and law students who'd seen the trial and wanted to be part of the solution. Yes, their first case was already filed. A Somali engineer detained at JFK Airport, held for 9 hours despite valid documentation, now represented by an institute that existed specifically to make such detentions expensive for the government. Taylor split his time now between Harvard's labs and the institute's war rooms. Mornings meant CRISPR research, breakthrough papers, graduate students whose work would save lives. Afternoons meant depositions, case reviews, strategy sessions, to dismantle the systems that had targeted him. "You don't have to do this," Sarah had said when he first announced the Institute's creation. "You won. You got justice. You could go back to just being a scientist." "I am a scientist," Taylor replied. "I'm just applying the same principles to a different problem. Identify the pathogen. Understand the system." He developed the cure. The cure was accountability. Agent Randall Turner faced federal charges for civil rights violations. His conviction carried a 3-year sentence and permanent prohibition from federal employment. Agents Doxey and Waya cooperated with investigators, providing testimony about the quota system in exchange for probation. District Chief Patterson was removed from his position, his Enhanced Enforcement Zones memo becoming evidence in multiple ongoing investigations. ICE's entire airport enforcement protocol underwent mandatory reform. No more quota systems, no more productivity metrics based on detention numbers, mandatory documentation of reasonable suspicion before any stop, body camera footage subject to random review by independent oversight boards, training programs on constitutional rights and implicit bias, taught by attorneys who'd sued the agency and won. The reforms didn't solve everything. Systems built over decades couldn't be dismantled overnight, but they created cracks in the foundation, spaces where accountability could take root. On the 1-year anniversary of his detention, Taylor stood in Terminal E at Logan Airport with a film crew documenting his return. It was deliberate, symbolic, a statement that fear wouldn't win. He walked through the same concourse where Turner had approached him, past the same baggage claim where his briefcase had hit the floor, through the same corridor where handcuffs had clicked shut. But this time, he walked freely, as an American citizen should, as he'd always had the right to do. A young black woman approached him hesitantly, phone in hand. "Dr. Taylor, I just want to say thank you. I'm a graduate student at MIT. I fly internationally for conferences all the time. After your case, I know my rights. I know I'm not alone." That was the mission. Not just his justice, but knowledge spread like vaccine against systemic abuse. Constitutional rights weren't abstract legal concepts. They were shields that only worked when people knew how to raise them. Taylor returned to his work, both works, with the understanding that this was his legacy now. Not just his scientific breakthroughs, but his refusal to accept that credentials and citizenship could be dismissed by federal authority without consequence. $20 million was the price of his humiliation. But the real cost was measured differently, in systems reformed, in the agents held accountable, in travelers who now walked through airports knowing someone had fought and won. In the next professor or engineer or student who would be spared the handcuffs because the government finally understood that constitutional violations carried a price too high to pay. Dr. Jackson Taylor had gone to Berlin to present research on healing. He'd returned to America to discover he needed to heal something far larger than genetic disease. And so he did.